Hi, it's Darren from SimNation. Just want to do a quick recap video for SNCFL. We're at the end of the season. We've just completed 2053 um, and want to do a quick video. Of course, this is for Draft Day Sports College Football 2023, SNCFL, SimNation's only DDSCF 2023 league. Just want to do a couple quick things, maybe a little bit different than what I normally start the videos with. Is one, I wanted to send out a special thank you to all the coaches in the league. It was a great season, very competitive. We had a lot of new coaches that meshed very well with the coaches we already had. So I just want to take a quick moment and say thank you to people like Gary, Skelter, Starfinder, Cable, just Sample, Shark, DWK, Frankie, um, sorry, Pops, there's a lot, Stuart, Van, DP, Steve, LA Smog, I know I'm always missing some, Udo, Kev, and just anybody that I missed, thank you. A lot of the new coaches who came in made this league really competitive, and that's people like LA Smog at West Virginia, be people like Kev at Texas. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. DWK at Penn State. I may just mention the main teams, not every team, but Steve at Oklahoma. Who else was new that I can think of off the top of my head? Probably also Cable was in his second season, but I still want to call out Cable because pretty major with just the contributions he makes to him week in, week out. And then, of course, people like Shark, Frankie, Van, Gary, Stewart have been here since the very beginning. So, or have been here for a long time. Of course, Gary and Frankie are originals. Van's been here pretty much since the beginning. So just want to say thank you. This league wouldn't be what it is without all of you. And at the end of every season, I just want to express my gratitude for all the things that you all have done. Um, Kind of going also into a different thing is I do want to say some nice things about Brooks, who is at Wolverine Studios. When this game first came out, I used to always compare this game to BBCF, ball bound college football. I've stopped doing that over the years, mostly because Brooks and the Wolverine Studios team just continues to release a solid product. Every season, they're asking for feedback, and while some of that feedback doesn't make it into the game, there's always a good reason why. And they've always been very quick to fix bugs and defects in the game. Since we do run on the latest and greatest most of the time, it's very important that that gets fixed. And Brooks has always been receptive, always been helpful, and I really like the direction that he's taken this game. So if you have a chance to purchase it, I highly recommend it. And I would look at the other titles as well. Wolverine Studios has titles in both pro and college basketball, of course, the pro football game, and some other ones as well. And it's just a solid studio. So they're definitely worth the look. And of course, if you want to join our league, I'm going to go through a couple teams here that you might be interested in taking on. We are moving towards the off season. The national championship game is over. What's next will be awards, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then will come the senior ball, followed by the season flip. I'm sorry, set red shorts, and then the season flip. So sometime around next Tuesday, we should flip the season, go into 2054, and we'll start with coach hiring and then move back into recruiting. So I think this will probably be the last season 2054 on this particular version of Draft Day Sports, because that season should carry us to roughly about the time that they're going to flip it to the new version. So again, thank you to everybody. It was a really good season, and I'm very happy with how it went. From a playoff perspective, kind of want to show that because when we last talked, we were at the quarterfinals. Of course, we just finished the finals, and I've actually put that video up of Will Frankie and I live casted that. But just a quick synopsis is between the quarterfinals and the finals was the semifinals. Maryland, of course, got by Miami. So this was a battle of high prestige teams. So Maryland is a 99 prestige team. Miami's a 94 prestige team. Maryland, of course, belongs to me. Miami, of course, belongs to Gary. So Bittner, who is Maryland's phenomenal underclassman wide receiver, went off in this game for like 147 yards and 2 touchdowns. Maryland used a 20-3 run in the second half to win the game 29-10, and of course advance. But as you can see, Beatty had a really good game. He didn't throw a pick. It was 323 yards, 1 touchdown, and of course Guerrera, who's both of these guys are underclassmen. They're going to be back next year. So is Bittner. Um, just a phenomenal game from Miami. The score doesn't reflect it, but Gary and Miami definitely played that game tight. In the other one, which was Oklahoma State versus Washington State, so this was me versus Frankie. Frankie at Oklahoma State, me at Washington State. It's a battle of 81 prestige teams. Both of them are 81s. Um, Essentially, it was a close game throughout until the fourth when McDougal just took over, who's Oklahoma State's phenomenal running back, and just shelled Washington State into submission. He finished the day with like 233 yards, 4 touchdowns, which allowed Cordell, who, if you listen to the live cast, Frankie has very mixed feelings about Cordell, who isn't going to win the game with his arm and is a quarterback who really, you want to have a strong running game to open up the pass. And if you watch that live cast, you'll see what happened. And I'll talk about that in a second. But really solid outing against Washington State, who made it. And of course, it wasn't an all-Darren final. So, of course, the final was Maryland versus Oklahoma State. This was a very established team in Maryland who is full of potential pro draft picks versus an underclassman Oklahoma State squad who uh, had a really good season, but I think the one thing that was lacking for Oklahoma State got exposed pretty quickly in the game, which was Cordell is a good quarterback, but he's not a game-changing one. So when Maryland started to stop McDougal on the ground, uh, they started to have to pass, and once they started to pass, Cordell just didn't do well. So Maryland jumped out to a very fast 28-6 lead, and of course they never really looked back as they won the game 45-20. WHITTEN, who is a senior, this is his last game, had a big game with like 333 yards, 4 touchdowns. Allard, who is Maryland's really phenomenal wide receiver, also a senior, said goodbye to Terrapin fans with 5 catches at 120 yards with a touchdown and brought home the second consecutive national championship. I think it's like the 14th for Maryland overall. So just a great season. There were a bunch of storylines this season. And I kind of want to talk about those just real quick. Um, I'm going to jump in here. So one of the storylines, of course, was in the ACC with Van and NC State. NC State's always been kind of good, but Van really turned the corner this year, got to the quarterfinals, played Oklahoma State really tough. That game could have probably went either way, but Van definitely showed up. I think NC State deserves more than a 13 rank, honestly. Florida State, they had Asa Garcia started pretty strong, but of course he got replaced midway through the year. Not midway, but later in the year. But Florida State, which is sample, they showed up really well. When we talk recruiting, they're loaded for next season. Miami struggled initially, but then just powered through with 7 straight wins. And Miami's a team to watch for next season because they're coming back fairly loaded. In the American Athletic, Houston continues to overachieve. I kind of hope Travis comes back soon. I don't think I can hold them off much longer. But Travis did a good job of setting Houston up, and they just continue to overachieve. Teams to watch next year is East Carolina and Cincinnati. East Carolina's coming back fairly loaded, but of course the main team to watch is Central Florida with Cable. I do expect them to bounce back, and that should be pretty interesting. The biggest story, of course, was the Big 12. this was the most competitive conference of them all. You had Oklahoma State, which is Frankie, Steve's at Oklahoma, Kev's at Texas, Sharks at Iowa State. You have LA Smog at West Virginia. You have Starfinder at Brigham Young. Huston hasn't really uploaded at Baylor. Me at Texas Tech, and now you can add yet another person into the mix with Van at Kansas. So next season, this is going to be uber competitive, but Oklahoma really showed up well in Steve's first season there. Kev made it to the championship game, and some would argue that he kind of got screwed rating wise, but um, Texas definitely showed up well. Shark continues to drive Iowa State further. West Virginia was kind of a mess when LA Smog took over. He stabilized them, and I just based on the recruiting class alone, and we'll talk about that later, he's in really good shape. BYU, Starfinder is getting them moving in the right direction. Not going to talk about Texas Tech because there's nothing to talk about there. But McDougal is back, and he should be running it up. So is Kenneth Avery. And there's quite a few big names still coming around. I think the big story next year is going to be Oklahoma State. They are a very young team. So is Oklahoma and Texas. I think that those three teams are probably going to vie for the championship. And if Shark can continue to recruit the way he is, he's going to be in that conversation as well. And I do think West Virginia will be in it. BYU, I think, is a year out, but we'll talk about that more later. In the Big Ten, the big story here was DP came back at Ohio State. Uh, Maybe down the stretch they weren't as good as they could have been, but let's be honest, they had injuries on their defense in both Michigan and Maryland were able to exploit that. If you're looking for a good team, Indiana is a good one. DWK came in at Penn State probably later in the season and really stabilized that squad. But really, it doesn't show here, but at one point in the top five, there were three Big Ten East teams in Maryland, Michigan, and Ohio State. Of course, Whitten had a really good season. LaFleur at running back had a great season for Michigan, and Vang as a freshman just lit it up. I do really like Flonzo McCormick from Michigan. I think he had a very strong season. In the West, Wisconsin is a team to look at if you're looking to join. So is Nebraska. Both of them are CPU teams, and they're pretty solid. Iowa, of course, is Frankie. He'll continue to change that team and make them stronger. I'm not going to go through recruiting right now. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Uh, Marshall is another one of those teams. If you want to come in and take a mid-major, great team. So is North Texas. Marshall upset some pretty big people. Almost took Oklahoma State out in the first round. So they are a really solid squad. In the Mid-American, I think I'm going to let Western Michigan sit one more year in the Mid-American, only because I think what I'm learning from Louisiana Monroe's move is that there needs to be a little bit more strengthening before we move them into a new conference. And I still got to figure out where they're going to go. But they had a really good run. Of course, unfortunately, they ran into the buzzsaw known as Oklahoma in the first round of the playoffs. Where, if I remember correctly, Steve scored like 73 points with Oklahoma on them against our 45. So they're going to continue to dominate the MAC, and they're just a solid squad all the way around. So good job there, Stewart. That's one of his teams. While Colorado State won the conference, the team to watch going into next season and the big storyline is Boise State. Skelter's figured it out. He's recruiting well. I think he's going to be in really good shape to do that. He's going to have some competition though, because if I remember correctly, on the opposite side of the house is Fresno State as Starfinder. He took them over, and he's having a pretty good run with recruiting as well. So hopefully that's the beginning of a rivalry between Boise State and Fresno State. But I'm pretty confident that Skelter's going to get Boise State past Colorado State in the next season or two. For the Pac-12, the big storyline here is again UCLA and Washington State. Washington State running for over like 5,000 yards rushing, close to 900 different things. And of course, Merriman was the big story. He's probably going to win the Heisman, honestly, but he just had a phenomenal season. And then UCLA, they beat Washington State twice, but in the third time in the playoffs, they lost. So, of course, they are the Pac-12 champion. But unfortunately, they ran into Washington State, who managed to trip them up and beat them to make it to the semifinal. Stanford is starting to come on strong, which is what you would expect from Skeletor. Van was at Washington. He's now at Oregon State. And if I remember correctly, I think Oregon is now Shark. So again, another one of these cases where the conference just got a lot tougher based on some of the recent additions. And then down in the South, of course, if Pops is uploading, USC will bounce back. And then you have Arizona State, which is Gary. And if he starts showing them some time, they're going to do really well. But I'll talk a little bit later. Right now, for me, UCLA's next season's number one, just because they had a phenomenal recruiting class and they bring back a lot of talent. Uh, the story in the Southeast was Louisiana Monroe. No one expected them to be 9-4, but it was a really tough season for Skelto. He did right the ship, if you will, and start doing it. But the big shock was LSU winning the SEC. They're way ahead of schedule on the rebuild. For those of you who remember, they were actually one of the worst teams in the league. They're slowly starting to get better year over year. SEC West, there are a lot of great open teams. You have Texas A&M, Alabama, Auburn. Alabama's likely going to be a top 10 team next year. Auburn has the potential to be a top 10 team. So if you're looking to join a conference, you have me at LSU, Skeletor at Louisiana Monroe, and then it's pretty open after that in the West. On the East side, Vanderbilt's a good team to look at. They definitely have some strength. Florida's SOA, who did a phenomenal job this year. Vanderbilt screwed up the East pretty bad with upsetting some of the teams that we expected to be there, like Georgia and Tennessee. Georgia had some injury issues and some other issues, but um, they'll bounce back. Shark's a phenomenal coach, and then Udo will have Tennessee back next year as well. But the story of the year is, even though I think Merriman is going to win the Heisman, one could argue that Ashby deserves to win it, who's the Louisiana Monroe uh, running back. He just had a phenomenal year, and he played in less games than Merriman. He was actually the regular season rushing champion. Of course, Merriman was the regular season rushing touchdown champion. Keep an eye on Barham and Dickens for the draft. These are two names you're going to hear again. And then last but not least is the Sun Belt. Arkansas State made a run that no one kind of saw coming. New Mexico State was ranked through most of the season, but then fell out. And then, of course, DWK has Georgia Southern. So I expect good things from them. As you can see, he's already recruited a 4-star and had a good recruiting season. So all in all, that's kind of what the story looked like this year. Awards-wise, I'll go through this real quick. The next sim is awards. It's awards are always hard for me, right? Because there's the people who I think are going to win and the people I think should win. Um, Controversially, I think Merriman deserves the Heisman in the offensive MVP. He just had a phenomenal year. I mean, he ran 40 touchdowns. He actually had like 28 or something like that, even before the playoffs. So he's had a good year. You could argue Vang. I do think this year's Heisman is going to be a running back. So the only person I think that you could maybe make an argument that should have it would be Ashby, who's the Louisiana Monroe running back. Um, I think Defensive Player of the Year, I I have a suspicion Hutchinson's going to win it. Uh, Now, candidly, I don't think he should. I think it should go to Brogan, or it should go to Hamilton, or it should go to forget what the kid's name is from Ohio State. I think it's Boyles. I think Boyles should have it. And then, of course, I mentioned the Michigan defensive end. Those are people I think should win it over Hutchinson. But the way the game works is I think Hutchinson's probably going to win it. And I wish I had a way to change that because I don't agree with it. From a quarterback perspective, it's going to be Noah Brewer. It maybe should be Marcus Witten because he was hurt and then he turned in this phenomenal season. But I think Brewer is going to win that and run the senior quarterback because all three of those quarterbacks are seniors, which we'll talk about the upcoming draft class. It's going to be pretty quarterback heavy this year. Now, again, we don't know what will happen with the randomizer, so keep that with a grain of salt. Joseph Dickens, all things considered, should win the Blitnikoff. He deserves it. 23 touchdowns, 1,600 yards, over 100 receptions. There's no doubt. I would argue that Folse should win the tight end award, but Shorter, I think, has more blocks and stuff. So I kind of expect Ronald Shorter from Arkansas State's going to win the Mackey Award, which goes to the top tight end. Lombardi, this one's the easiest of them all. It's going to go to Lopez. I would argue DeVito deserves it more, but it's going to go to Lopez. Defensive lineman, we talked about this. I think Hutchinson will win this one again. I don't think he really deserves it. I do think that Hawkins deserves this. He had a really good year at Virginia Tech, and he definitely deserves the Butkus. The Thorpe Award will probably go to Grantham. I can't think of someone else who probably deserves it more than him. He does actually deserve it. I don't want Joseph Green to win it. He had some issues in the national championship game, but I think he's going to win the Roy Guy Award. And then, of course, it'll be interesting to see how the kicker one pans out. I'm not quite sure about that. When we talk about names to kind of know for the upcoming draft, and again, this is just seniors because I don't know who underclassmen-wise is going to come out. Keep an eye on Noah Brule. He doesn't have much of an arm, but he is accurate as hell. But I think really, if you're looking at it, it's going to be Barham, who, as you can see, is just a beast. It'll be Whitten. I have changed views to see Whitten, who of course was injured, but he had a really solid year, especially this year. So Whitten should definitely be up there. And then some other names to kind of keep an eye on is Shaw out of UCLA. He's really solid too. And if you look at that, he's had a really good career. You also have Cordell out of Oklahoma State. We talked about him. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Paul REECE out of Florida State, and I'm going to show you him. So Florida State has Asa Garcia, who was the #1 recruit last season. Phenomenal quarterback, but he had a little bit of a struggle at times. Paul REECE is a gunslinger who has started for Florida State, but as you can tell, his stats aren't really there, but he's got really good skills as a quarterback. So if he makes the cut to get into the draft, I kind of expect or suspect that he will do pretty well. And then the only other guy who you might want to talk about is Marshall's quarterback Sparks, who's pretty good as well. As you can see, he has a 90 arm, 96 intelligence, 79 accuracy. This is a good quarterback profile. I know a lot of people don't like it, but he's also a clutch QB, and that alone will help him. Now, he does throw a lot of interceptions, so just keep that in the back of your mind. This is a weaker running back class than normal, candidly. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It's definitely not as strong as the running back class last year was. Most of these guys are all underclassmen, so that's going to make it kind of interesting for some of this. But if you look at it, some of the names just to kind of keep in the back of your mind that I think there's a chance Harper's going to come out. He's an underclassman though. Shelley is probably one of the top running backs in the draft, and he's got good speed, man. That is a horrible mustache. But agility-wise, he's good. He had a good season for Texas Tech, who had a horrible season, by the way. DeWitt Kowalski out of Maryland is someone who potentially could come out as well. And I think he would do well. He's just a really interesting, and he had a big game in the national championship. Other ones that I'm just not going to show, but I'm going to mention is Ratcliffe out of Colorado State, Felton out of Boston College, Barron out of Georgia Tech, Griswold out of Middle Tennessee State. Another guy to think about, and he's a Skelter product, is Luster out of Stanford. Um, it's a weak class from a offensive line, but some people to kind of keep an eye on is Fowler at guard out of Kansas State, Zhang out of Ohio State, also a guard. These guys are all tackles. Is Copeland, who's from Iowa, Bruno out of Boston College. I think a generational talent. It'll be interesting to see what the randomizer does with him. Is DeVito from Baylor. I mentioned him a little bit earlier, but if you look at DeVito, because I think we can see him from a pancake perspective. No, we can't. Um, he's at Baylor, if I'm not mistaken. So he is just a phenomenal talent. So Blake DeVito, 79 strength, 79 intelligence, 88, 93. He's a good blocker. He's an athletic blocker, and he's had a really solid career. I mean, over 100 pancakes the last 2 seasons. So this is a guy who I do expect to see, if the randomizer doesn't nerf him, will be likely a generational talent. Watson out of Arkansas State's another guy you need to keep an eye on. Wide receiver, there's a lot of good wide receiver options in this draft. There seem to be almost every year, but this year you got Allard out of Maryland, who had a phenomenal year. Um, see if we can't pick him up here. He may not show up. Yeah, here he is. So Allard, of course, is very fast. He's got good hands. He's agile, and he's had a solid career. Other people to keep an eye on is McAfee from Ohio State. I don't think he shows up here. But he's another guy I would keep an eye on. I think him and Allard are generational talents. Bison from Michigan is another good one. Daly from Florida State. A guy who's flown under the radar most of his career is Becerra from Old Dominion. This is another guy who I think is a generational talent. And of course, you see him right here. 92 speed, 92 hands, 88. He's a possession wide receiver. I don't, yeah, he's been with ODU the whole time. That's kind of a shock to me. I mentioned Daly as someone to keep an eye on. Um, and then Becknell from Washington is another person, as well as Smith from Memphis. Cornerback, I think there's some really good cornerbacks. I don't know. I think there's only like maybe one or two generational talents here. So Abney from Mississippi State's a good talent. Tillery from North Texas is a guy I would keep a very close eye on. He is just, he's obscene with his skill. So I'm very happy. I'm very high on him as a whole, uh, and he's one of those guys I'm gonna keep an eye on as I start to build my draft class for Pittsburgh in the WWPF. Um, so as you can see, he's 96 speed, 60 hands, 62 skill. His skill is the only thing I think that brings him down, but you can't coach that speed. Foreman from ULM's another speedster. You got Hanna, who's really fast, but he's not going to pick the ball off out of UNC. Barella is a good, really good cornerback out of Texas. You have Pop out of Boise State, Bedford out of Iowa. Those are guys I'd keep an eye on. An intriguing prospect, I think, out of Indiana is Kinsey. And I only know him because I've had to play against him quite a bit. But 86 speed, 76 tackle, 56 hands, 91 agility. He's a beast. I would keep an eye on him. Leak out of Penn State. One of my favorites out of LSU is Deal, who did a great job. But staying in the SEC, keep an eye on Parker out of Georgia for free safeties. Arsenal out of Notre Dame is a really, really good, strong safety. Barton from Houston, and then Christmas from Houston. So they actually have two from Houston. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Sometimes it does show up that way, other times it doesn't. I mentioned Arsenal, 86 speed, 78 tackle. agility. He's probably one of the better strong safeties. Safety's a weaker class than it was last year. Linebacker, it's not the greatest of classes, but it's not bad when you think about you have Atkins from Florida State, Nick Quinn from Clemson, a guy who may fly under the radar, and it's a shame, and it's my fault actually, is Glenn out of Maryland. So as you can see, 88 speed, 81 tackle, 79. He's just a beast. We'll see what the Nerfer does. His stats aren't the best because he had to show time. Gates out of Florida State's a guy to keep an eye on. Pantoja out of Central Florida. Witt. Probably the guy you want to kind of keep the most eye on, though, is Childers out of Nebraska. I mean, 80 agility, 83 speed, 86 tackle, 51 strength, 100 skill. That dude's gonna be one of the better linebackers in the draft if he doesn't get nerfed. Um, at defensive tackle, it's a weak class, honestly, but you do have some good, strong, and good fast guys in Hall from San Jose State, Whitehurst out of Texas, Wise out of forget where Wise is from. I'll come back to him. You have Gallo from Nebraska. Defensive end, it's a pretty stacked class. You got Boyles, I mentioned him earlier out of Ohio State, Hallman from Michigan, Henderson from Western Michigan, Brogan from Arizona State, Baez from Miami, Flores from Cincinnati, Trammell from South Florida. I'm going to show you Sanchez and Roney here in a second, but Watley from Texas A&M. Sanchez from Ball State could be a generational talent. And again, I say could be a lot of times because I don't know what the nerfer is going to do or the randomizer. But 80 speed, 70 tackle, 66 strength. His agility is not that great, but this is a pretty solid guy. The other guy to look at is Roney out of USC. Um, I think he's pretty good as well. 80 speed, 63, 66, 77. That's a guy who's probably going to get in there and really help. Now, the thing you got to deal with Roney is he's coming off a bad season with USC. So those are guys I would keep an eye on. Again, I don't know what juniors are coming out, so won't know that. Of course, after we do the Senior Bowl, which will get an insight into some of these guys, we'll do the season flip. Want to talk a little bit about recruiting real quick, just to wrap up kind of some of this. Just wait for it to load, and I apologize. Sometimes it's not as fast as I'd like it to be. But I think when you talk about recruiting, right now the number one class is Alabama. It's not a great class. Keep an eye on Peralta out of South Carolina. He is a good linebacker, I think. We'll see when we actually get to see his stats. But the class is largely based on volume. Maryland won't probably be number two by the end of it. They'll probably be in the top five, but it's a small class. But as you can see, it's powered with a lot of 5 stars, probably not as much as another one, but I think Ron Baker is going to be a good replacement to Whitten. I don't know what's going to happen with the running backs because Vang exploded this year as a freshman. And of course, he's a 4-star, not a 5-star. So there may be some transfer bait, though. Louisiana Monroe, it's another solid class from Skelter. It's what you kind of expect with them. I expect them to get really much better on defense with people like Mercado, people like Goldman, Childress. And you got to wonder, Skelter doesn't normally get 5-star running backs, but when he does, you kind of need to be worried because they're traditionally going to explode. Georgia, again, not a star-studded class, but it's a solid class for Shark, and it should help him grow. He's got 2 solid cornerbacks in Cox and Magnum, and he retoured his O-line with Bowling and Powers. Central Florida, really bad season for them, but a good recruiting season. So it should be interesting. I think Craig will compete for playing time at quarterback, and he'll get some help from the offensive line with Pate and Drake to open holes, and then open holes for Wells as a running back. 10 5-stars. Holy shit. I don't know what Just Sample is selling at Florida State. I probably do, but That's amazing. He did really good with the linebackers this year. I'll be the first one to tell you I'm not high on Vickery. I did recruit him, I did scout him, and I dropped him because I have some concerns with him. But Carey and Wills are probably amazing. And then you got Rouse and Hamilton who just give more options to Garcia at wide receiver. Florida State's one of those teams I think it's going to bounce up pretty hard. Texas Christian is a CPU team. If you're interested in the Big 12, they're one of the only two teams left in the Big 12. They reloaded that offense with Moses and Blevins at running back, and then Pappas, Avery, and Brooks at wide receiver. So they should be pretty good this year. Cincinnati, every year there's a lot of people drafted from Cincinnati into the WWPF. I think we have another future group with Nicholson, Ramirez, Barnes, and Coggins. It should be interesting to see how that plays out. If you're interested in Auburn, they're a good team as well. Uh, it'll be. I really would like someone to. I kind of wish Matt would come back and take Auburn, but I don't expect him back anytime soon. But if you want a good team, Auburn and Alabama both are really good teams. Milliken is someone who might be special. Jensen and Oliver are two people I wouldn't sleep on either. That defense got pretty much more nasty. And then, of course, they have Crow and Cortez to open holes to get at the quarterback. I know Georgia Tech shows as 10th, but I'm going to say West Virginia's 10th. So LA Smog did a really good job building something special here. A lot of upside to this West Virginia team, starting with Spurgeon at running back, McDermott at quarterback. Is this potentially the beginning of a West Virginia shot at the conference championship? Very well could be. When we talk about teams, and this is a way, way, way too early top 25, right? So one of the, I personally believe preseason Maryland's going to be number one. Just the way it works, without doubt, the CPU will say Maryland is number one. But for me, when the season ends next year, I kind of expect UCLA to be number one. They have a lot of great pieces coming in together. Stewart's a great coach. Miami will probably be number two behind Gary. He just keeps reloading year after year. Maryland, it will really depend on did they find the right pieces to replace people like Allard, uh, Glenn on the defense, and then Whitten at quarterback. They'll probably be number three. Louisiana Monroe should bounce back, be number four. I think Clemson will be number five. Again, a really great CPU team if you want to take them. I expect Stewart to be number six with Michigan. Frankie will come in around number seven. There's still some unknown, but I do think he found his quarterback of the future. And if we're right, Frankie's just going to be that dangerous because, again, he lost the national championship game because he's pretty one-dimensional, and I was able to capitalize on that. Uh, Keep an eye on Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a wild card. I do expect that they could be anywhere from 1 to 8. Steve is a really good coach, and I think that he's going to have them really chomping at the bit. Number 9 will probably be Alabama. Number 10 will be Georgia with Shark. And the ones just missing out is Florida State, NC State, Ohio State, Boise State, and Houston. I'm not ready to say much about Stanford, but I do think Skelter's going to have Boise State pretty poised for a good run. Western Michigan's in that category as well. So that's kind of it. On Tuesday, we'll do awards. On Thursday, we will uh, probably do Senior Bowl. Actually, Tuesday, I'll probably do awards and Senior Bowl. And then Thursday, I'll probably do set red shirts. The main reason for that is just I'm trying to slow the season down a little bit to let WWPF catch up. But that probably means that next Saturday we'll do the season flip. So if you want to join us, Saturday's the best time to join us. Uh, Otherwise, thank you for your time. Definitely take a look at our league. It's a great league, great coaches. And again, to all of you who helped with the season, thank you, especially Frankie, who helped me with different podcasts and different things. Um, it was just a great season. I'm very grateful to you all for it and can't wait to close this out and begin the next season. I will probably do another video here shortly about the features I'd like to see in 2024, and I'm going to put that together mostly for Brooks, just so I can point out what I'm thinking and get his thoughts. I'm by no means an influencer of any kind. It's just I try to take every opportunity I have to get my thoughts on the game to try to make it better because I'm very passionate about it. Everyone have a great day and hope you have a great weekend and happy Easter. Bye.